Good afternoon. Hi. My name is Shane Brodie. I am here in a park with a whole bunch of people playing pickleball, which I'd never heard of before until I came here. So there's quite a few people here in the park. There's a lot of ambient noise. There's a lot of people talking. And we also have quite a few wind gusts. So I may be editing this video quite a lot, and we might start over if there's some wind gusts or whatever. So we have to deal with it. We have to deal with the circumstances we're in. I'm a transsexual man. I'm traveling around the country interviewing trans people who may have kind of a different perspective, who might have kind of interesting political or religious beliefs. And today I have a guest, and she is going to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Roberta, and I live here in New England. And I had a friend who suggested that I might talk with Shane.
Yeah.
Because
those are the best recommendations, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
She's a good friend, and at some of our local group meetings, she said your story might be of interest to some of the younger people because I've been transgender since 1986.
Okay,
so
great.
That's 36 years ago.
Yeah.
At this point. And so you could say that that's essentially half my life at this point. Mm-hmm. So times were different back then, obviously.
Yeah.
There was a lot less visibility into the trans community. In fact, it was really hard for me to figure out how to do the transgender maneuvers.
Right, because that was before the internet.
Yes, there was no internet. I happened to be living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time. And, I tried, even before that, when I was living in Oregon, I tried things like my mother's birth control pills and things like that, just to keep, to see if I could get something started.
It is the same hormone.
It is, but before the internet, before there was any way to get any knowledge, one never knows that you also need a hormone blocker for the male side of it. So those birth control pills basically did nothing. I tried on and off for years. I got little tiny breast buds. That was about it.
Where were you living in Oregon, by the way?
In the Portland area.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And but when I was living in Phoenix, one time I happened to find myself over in Los Angeles on business. And in my hotel room, there was no internet, there were no computers in those days, but there was the Yellow Pages.
Right.
Remember the Yellow Pages?
Yeah. And they were quite extensive.
Yeah. And we're talking L.A. here.
Yeah.
So I looked in
big, thick book.
A big, thick book. I looked in the L.A. Yellow Pages, and I found some clinics that did, all the cosmetic surgery type stuff.
Sure.
And I even found one that said something about PEC implants for men.
Really?
And I
in the
said,
80s?
In the 80s, yeah.
Wow.
This was in the mid 80s.
Yeah.
And
how interesting. I thought that was more like a recent thing.
Well, but we're talking LA and the the land of the stars and all that. And so
vanity.
So I gave them a call and told them what I was interested in. They said, "Oh yeah, no problem. Come on over. What can I do?" And they said, "Well, come on in. Let's talk."
Had they seen people like you before?
They didn't seem to think that I was the first one on the planet. They didn't really say anything, but so I went there. They greeted me. He sat back in his chair. This cosmetic surgeon. And
sure.
He said, "Well, I tell you what. Let's start with some very small implants and do the hormone treatments at the same time, and then as the hormones take over, we can remove the implants."
Interesting.
And so that's what they did.
Is that usual? Because I would think that
it isn't usual today.
Yeah, because I would think you would want to wait maybe for the hormones to take effect, and then, if more needed to be done.
Yeah, well, that's the way they did it.
Yeah.
Or at least he did it back then.
Sure.
And, you know, I was happy with that. I went about a year with that.
Okay.
And some growth had happened. The
So
implants were in
you did
there.
go through the surgery.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, he said, "When do you want to do it?" I said, "When can we do it?" He said, "How about day after tomorrow?" You know, it's
Okay.
very quick. You
Sure.
know, I think it was the very next week. I was living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time, so it was only a $9 airplane ticket over to LA. So no big deal.
Wow.
They had all these hot deals all the time.
Yeah,
Either
yeah.
$9 and rent a car, or $35 for the ticket and the car, something like that.
There's also like deals to Las Vegas, like really short.
Yeah, short trips.
Yeah.
So I did that. So I went about a year.
Yeah.
Some growth from the hormones were helping. The implants were still in there. And he said after about a year, come back, let's take out the little implants. They were small ones.
Were they the saline or silicone?
To be honest, I don't even know.
Okay. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Then he said, right, much to my surprise, I said,
Okay, we had to take a little break. So could you go on with your story, please?
yeah, so I went there after about 1 year. He said, yes, things are coming along. The hormones are doing some good. There's some growth happening. And I said, what do we do next?
Right. Yeah.
He said, well, are you ready for part 2?
Ah.
And I said,
So did he have kind of a plan for you?
I don't, well, to be honest, when he said, are you ready for part 2? I thought he meant, are you ready for me to take out the implants and put in some bigger ones?
Sure.
But no, what he meant was bottom surgery.
Okay.
And I figured that out, and I was a little bit surprised at that.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, but I couldn't even, I didn't even have the nerve to bring that request up to this man, right?
Right.
And
Just for a second, just wondering, had you gone through any kind of therapy?
No.
Did this doctor bring up any organization or standards of care or anything like that?
no. There was no W path mentioned.
Sure.
There was no therapy mentioned. There were no papers or signatures on pieces of paper that needed to be done. He just said, "Are you ready for part 2?"
Sure.
And after I kind of was surprised enough to get over that request, and I almost immediately said yes,
Okay.
because I knew what I wanted.
Right.
Right.
Had you been thinking about it for like a long time?
Ever since junior high school.
Okay.
You know, and so I said, yes, when can we do that? And he said, how about week after next? And comparing that to what people go
10
through
days.
nowadays,
Wow.
it was 10 days. Yeah.
Wow.
And so, back to Phoenix I went, get another airplane ticket, back over there, bring my overnight bag, and, it was just very quick, you could say.
Yeah.
The time from when I first went in there to inquire about, is there anything I can do to this cosmetic surgeon place,
Sure.
right? To being signed up for bottom surgery that quickly, it was just amazing to me. But there were no papers, there were no W path requirements, there were no signatures on any pieces of paper that needed to be done. But there were also no regrets or anything on my part, because
And it sounded it sounded like he sort of trusted where you were at with it.
somehow he could tell during that first visit what my path was.
Yeah. It would be interesting to actually talk to him.
Yeah, he admitted that he was not surprised that I was back and asking about these things.
Yeah. It makes me
could tell.
wonder how many patients he'd had before. Because he just, it sounds like just another work day for him.
Yeah, it did sound like
Yeah,
it. And
yeah.
as a matter of fact, he is now retired.
Okay.
However, his son, under the same name, operates a clinic in Beverly Hills for the Hollywood movie star types.
Okay, sure.
To keep them looking young. So
Right.
it's in the family, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But 10 days later, there I was. Brought my overnight bag, spent my days in the clinic there, and
Did they have a place for you to recover afterwards?
no, back then it was, I spent 3 days in the clinic.
Okay.
And then he gave me a prescription for a number of pain pills and things, and sent me on my way back home.
Wow, 3 days.
To recover. Yeah.
Wow.
Now 5 is the minimum standard, I think. But
and usually
it was just 3.
A lot of these places will have a separate sort of inpatient clinic that is more like a recovery area. It's not where they actually do the procedures, but it's a place to recuperate, which is great. Yeah.
Well, so the one thing that they didn't do, he continued. He gave me a prescription to continue with the hormones.
Yeah.
But there was certainly no need for any T blockers at that point.
Okay.
When I went into the clinic, they said, "Hi, how are you, Robert?" Which was my name at the time.
Okay.
Right? But the clinic, a lot of the nurses and the assistants and everything, they were Hispanic. I mean, we're talking L.A.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so they all started calling me Roberto instead of Robert.
Okay.
Then when I woke up from the surgery, it was Roberta.
Interesting.
And so a lot of people, they struggle with, I need to come up with a better name. In my case, it was basically given to me while I was lying there in the clinic.
Sure. Well, that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have one of those names where you can do that.
Yeah, exactly. So, then it was just...
How long did it take you to recover from that, by the way?
Well, I was just going to mention, I went back to Phoenix. I spent a few days at home recuperating. Then I went back to work. And
right, because you're probably paying for everything out of pocket.
Oh yeah,
too.
there was no insurance coverage or anything back then. But after 3 days, all of a sudden I got a visit from the company nurse who said, "You look like death warmed over. We don't know exactly what's going on with you, but you need to go on medical leave." So they put me on medical leave.
Was that at this point? Did your pain meds like taper off or something, or?
Well, I can't take too many pain meds and go to work.
Sure.
So
sure.
So
it was a balance between the two.
It was a balance between the two, but the company nurse and my boss came by and said, "You need to go on medical leave," and they put me on medical leave for a month.
Okay.
And then, when I did come back, I was obviously much better at that point.
Great.
Right?
Great.
So...
By the way, did you notice any change in how you were treated as a woman in the engineering field, especially if you're traveling a lot and people don't know you?
A little bit, yes. There were some. People would smile at me more often.
Okay.
People would open doors for me.
Sure.
Let me go in first.
Did that feel good?
Yes.
Yeah.
It did.
So we were talking about being involved in communities, and you were mentioning that you had a couple of friends at work. How about outside of work, in the regular communities?
You mean trans people?
Yeah, in the various cities that you were living in.
Not until I came here to New England.
Okay.
I think maybe there was a lot more... people were a lot more private about that kind of thing.
Yeah. And this was, what, the late 80s and 90s?
Yes, yes. Exactly. I've been here in New England since the mid-90s.
Okay.
So before that, there really wasn't... There may have been some people. I mean, I knew some people from work.
Yeah.
But outside of work, I didn't know of any groups. There may have been some, but you have to remember, too, that you're not going to go search for them online when there's no internet.
Right. Yeah. I remember...
and they're not going to be in the yellow pages either.
Actually, some of them are. I was living in the Pacific Northwest at the time, in Seattle and also Portland, and there was Ingersoll Gender Center, which was run by a woman, a wonderful activist named Marcia Botzer, and she had been running these groups forever. And it was in the Yellow Pages, and you could find it, and she had it every week. It was very consistent. And so if you were in town, you knew where you could go.
What years were those?
This was the well, she had been running it for far longer than when I was involved in it, but I was there in the late 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. So like 96 and onward.
And 96 is when we left from Seattle.
Okay. But Ingersoll had been going on for far longer before that.
Well, it's too bad that I didn't even know about it.
Yeah, they had trans women groups. MTF is what people would say, or male to female transsexual. Transgender was just, that language was just coming in then. And
Yeah.
that was new language at the time. People were still saying transsexual. I still say transsexual in regard to myself because I did come out during that time. It's too bad because it was a great center. It still exists, but it's part of the larger LGBT center there now. But before it was just its own program.
Yeah. Well, nowadays, with the way they make people go through the gauntlet, so to speak, of WPATH and papers and signatures, you meet people along the way.
Yeah.
When you're following that path for a year
Sure.
or whatever it is they
Sure.
want you to do.
Well, it's easier now because they have informed consent, but there used to be much more gatekeeping.
Well, all the gatekeeping, though, would allow people to meet others along the way.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas in my case, it was just me and the mysterious doctor in L.A.
Sure.
And just snap, crackle, pop, and you're done type thing.
Sure.
So I didn't really have that much opportunity to meet others along the way, at least beforehand.
Personally, I would have rather just been able to go to a doctor and just have a relationship with the doctor, and then be able to do that. But I can see what you're saying. There are other ways to gain community, though. Like I was saying, that trans center, Ingersoll, which provided peer support. But then also, I know I've been talking to a lot of older trans women, and they've been saying that they started it out in cross-dressing groups, and that was fun for them because they have a lot of events. Yeah,
I never did any of that.
No.
Probably because I never had any sisters or anything to borrow anything from.
Sure.
No, I just, I knew ever since junior high school that I did not belong in this locker room.
Yeah.
What more can you say?
Sure. So, I guess, what was kind of the breaking point for you in terms of, I'm going to start doing this? Even up in Oregon when you were sort of self-medicating, what was the thing that kind of pushed you there?
Well, just, I was trying all these things on my own.
Yeah.
Not knowing what I needed.
Sure.
And not being able to find out what I needed.
Sure.
Because there was no internet, there was no information. You're not going to go to the library and find a book on it even.
Mm-hmm.
So when I accidentally found that LA Yellow Pages, I knew exactly what to do at that point. So you could say that was the big push. Was that one night in the hotel room?
Yeah, but
I found that.
You had to be looking though in order to find it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I looked for it.
So you were looking for it for a while.
I had looked for it in our phone book in Phoenix and found nothing.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I needed an LA phone book, not a Phoenix phone book.
Sure.
Right? Because there was nothing in Phoenix.
Yeah.
At that time.
Sure.
So I guess you could say that was my self-motivated push.
Yeah. And then in the late 90s, people were using the internet and then coming up with websites, MTF websites. Lynn Conway, for instance, had a very famous website.
That's true. However, in the late 90s, there wasn't really any need for me to go looking for websites on the subject.
Yeah.
because I had already been the path.
Okay, so you weren't even after transitioning, after medically transitioning, you weren't looking for any sort of community with other trans people.
Not until I came here.
And why did you feel like suddenly you needed more trans people to be around?
I don't know that I felt I needed it.
Yeah.
I felt more like, you know what, I think I could probably help some others.
Okay.
If I found a group.
So you felt so stable in your life and well transitioned and happy that you felt like you could give back.
I could give back.
Okay.
That's kind of what I wanted to do, was give back. And you know what, and you should have seen the faces in the local group here when I showed up one time for a meeting, dressed with the rest of them, and stood there and told my story about you know, how it happened to me, when it was, and so on. And there are people in that room that are, you know, just barely starting down the path.
Right.
And you know, I could tell that they were really appreciative of being able to hear some of the stories of, you know, how I got there, how I went through it, and how I, you know, proceeded after the fact.
Yeah.
You know, what kinds of things did I experience with my family? What kinds of things did I experience at work? What kinds of things?
So we've talked about a little bit about your work. How about your family or your other relationships, like, you know, more intimate relationships?
Well, you know, first of all, it's been 36 years.
Sure.
So there aren't that many people around anymore that remember me from before 36 years ago.
And you've moved a lot.
And I've moved a lot. But there are always a few people that you thought were your friends who disappeared from the face of the earth. You know, didn't want anything to do with you. But then there are other people who are, you know, very supportive. I was married in 1981 before I transitioned. Okay. But my wife, she sort of knew what was coming. And she said, as long as we can have our two daughters, our two kids, which turned out to be daughters, as long as we can have our two kids first, I'm okay with that. Okay. And she's still with me after 41 years. Okay.
So did you postpone what you were doing for that reason?
I postponed the surgery until after the daughter was born. Yes.
Wow.
Yes, but that was almost coincident with the same time. I mean, the postponement that we're talking about was only a few months. Yeah. So that was not an issue. My mother, she was very supportive. Yeah. She knew all along. Oh, wow. Somehow she knew all along that I needed to be the daughter that she wanted. She had 3 sons. And she wanted, and she knew that I should have been, and now finally was, and she was happy with that. Wow. Now, my dad passed away before I transitioned, so I never really got to find out what his reaction might have been. Yeah. Although, knowing him, he probably would have shrugged his shoulders and said, whatever floats your boat, something like that, you know. I have 2 brothers. They are sort of agnostic on the whole thing, you know. They don't give me many words of support, but they don't say anything critical either. Sure. But when we get together for family or whatever, they just, you know, I'm just still there. Okay. So you still have like a close relationship with them? It's just like a non-issue? Yeah, but they live far away. One's in Seattle, one's in New Mexico. Okay. So we don't see each other very often. Sure. We do have our 2 daughters, and they're now grown, and they both accept me for who I am, but then that's all they've ever known me as. Sure, right? Yeah, right. So, one of the advantages of having it be so long ago. Right? Yeah, you were saying, 36 years? 36 years. Yeah. Well, and they were both born before I had the surgery, right? By definition, they have not known me any other way. So, yeah, it's... And I have numerous friends in the area. Some left over from my working days. Others from square dancing. We do a lot of square dancing, and they all accept me for who I am. Not a problem.
Are you still married?
Yes, she's still
Okay.
with me.
All right.
After 41 years, she's still with me.
By the way, this is kind of a strange question, but did you get remarried, like under gay marriage laws, perhaps?
No,
No? Okay. You just kept it the original license?
kept it. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
By the way, since you didn't go through the sort of protracted process, the longer process where you have to get a bunch of letters and psychologists and blah, 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 did you experience any legal problems with that? Because the letters help you change your legal documentation.
I didn't have any problem changing
Okay.
that. I have a passport.
Yeah.
It's gender markers female. I
Yeah.
have a driver's license that's female. I have all the legal documentation. The only time I ever run into a problem
Yeah.
is with when doctors do billing to insurance companies, because the company still had my Robert name,
Yes.
and the insurance carried over to that. And in 1968 I got a Social Security card with that name on it. And so now when it's time for Medicare, that's the name they use. But when I go to the doctor's office, all my records are Roberta.
Oh, interesting.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then they send it to Medicare, and I get it back, and there's always a footnote that says the name doesn't match, but they pay it anyway because it's so close.
Yeah. So is there a way that you can maybe like call Medicare or Medicaid and tell them this name change so that they can just remedy that?
I have inquired with them,
Okay.
and they said it can be done. It's a long, protracted
Oh
thing.
my goodness.
But they said, if I were you, I wouldn't mess with it. You're collecting Social Security. There's, if you change it on Medicare and Social Security doesn't pick that up, they might cut you off.
Oh yeah.
So
There's
just,
always some weird stuff like that.
So just leave it alone. And,
Yeah.
And
I'll tell you, I kept a lot of my records as female, even though I had already transitioned and passed and had a bunch of my documents in male. I kept some of them female so that I could keep insurance coverage,
exactly.
right? Because I still had gynecological needs.
Yes.
And even later in life, like recently, for instance, I did go to a gynecologist not too long ago. I already had that surgery, but she was the only doctor in town who would, I think one of two that would prescribe hormones for trans people. And so I had to go to a gynecologist. And of course, my insurance did not pay for it because I'm a man going to a gynecologist.
Of course.
So
yeah.
even here later in life, 22 years down the line, it's still a problem. But
It's
Yeah.
a problem too, even
Yeah.
for me. Here we are, 36 years later. They say, when have you had a breast exam? You go in for,
yes.
and then they bill it, and Medicare says, what is this?
Right.
But
Well, men do get breast cancer, though.
and now that's less of a problem than it used to be.
Yeah, men
Okay.
do get breast cancer.
They
though.
do, right?
Yeah.
So,
And in fact, when they get it, it's often not diagnosed.
Yeah.
And then they have real problems.
Yep. So, yeah, there are some of those little nagging problems that
Yeah.
always seem to hang out there.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Like
it's
she
amazing.
said, just leave it alone, and someday if you don't get your Social Security or if Medicare doesn't pay a bill, then you'll have to call them up and discuss it with them.
Yes. Yeah.
But I wouldn't.
And bring a lawyer.
Yeah, but they said I wouldn't try to do any global changes to anything.
Okay. Yeah, it might cause more problems. Who knows? Yeah. Sometimes when you're dealing with databases and unfortunately government employees, there's not a lot of competence sometimes. People,
I just talked to an accountant who's doing some work with some government contracts.
Sure.
They said they hired 230 students for the summer.
Oh my goodness.
To help them catch up on their workload.
What do you bet they were interns too? What do you bet
So-
they were paying the minimum wage?
They're paying a minimum wage, and they don't give them any training. They're the same people that can't make change at McDonald's.
Right. Yeah. They're
Without their computer.
probably first year undergraduates or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Thank you, government. Anyway, so back to kind of the center of our interview. We've talked about your identity a lot.
Oh, one thing I wanted
yeah.
to mention too is that all along, even all the way from before transition
Sure.
through transition, yes, from before transition through transition and
Yeah.
after, we've always been involved with square dancing.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah,
I've known square dancing friends.
Do you
from
get all
before.
dressed up in the frilly stuff? And...
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
But
I don't know if y'all have ever seen square dancers, but they get dressed up. Yeah.
oh, I know.
Yeah.
Trust me, I know.
Yeah.
But there are advanced levels for it too, and
Okay.
in the advanced levels, we don't generally get dressed up. It's more like come as you are.
Okay.
So I might come just like this,
Sure.
which is
sure.
okay. But yeah, there are occasions when the square dance dress with the petticoats and
Yes,
everything
the
are
petticoats.
used.
Yeah, I didn't know what to call them, but they have like these multiple
The
layers.
old-fashioned term is crinolines.
Yeah, crinolines. Yeah, they have all kinds of layers, and then
Yep.
everything's really fancy looking. I like to dance too. I do more Latin ballroom. I love that.
Right.
I love
So we
that.
have friends from before, during, and after transition
Oh.
that have stayed with
you
us.
and your wife.
Yeah, both of us, right?
Yeah.
All the way through the years. We still
Interesting.
do Christmas cards and everything else with all these people.
Sure.
We see some of. We square dance here in New England on Monday nights.
Sure.
And
are these in like because square dancing is usually done in clubs?
yes, it's a club.
Right? Did you ever find any like friction because you're two women who are
No.
dancing together?
No, it turns out that the square dancing of late, the age of square dancers been averaging higher and higher as
Sure.
years go by.
Sure.
And so now, due to natural events in people's lives, there are more women than there are men.
Okay.
So when you get into a square, it's sometimes common to have a very estrogen-rich square.
Okay. All right. Have you ever done other kinds of dancing like that, like contra dancing?
Contra dancing is similar to square dancing. We've stuck with square dancing. We tried line dancing, but at the time we were doing that and taking the lessons,
Yeah.
they still allowed all the smokers in the bars, and we were choking to death in
yeah.
there, so we gave
Right.
that up.
Yeah.
We never got back to it, so
Yeah.
square dancing is it for us.
And now with some bars, like they don't have tobacco, but then they have marijuana smoke, and it's too much.
It could
It's too
be.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We haven't been into many pubs and bars. In fact, I've been to several lately. Usually they're like retirement parties for people I used to work with or something like
sure,
that.
sure.
But they all accept me, obviously.
Yeah.
But most of them don't even know any different.
Yeah, right.
But I've never seen anybody smoking anything in any of these
Yeah.
places. They're all non-smoking establishments.
Yeah, it's
So-
interesting for me to travel around the U.S. and notice places where people actually do smoke a lot, because it used to be just all over the culture.
Yeah.
And now people don't smoke as much, and so it's unusual when sometimes I'm around people who are smoking a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that we've made that change.
Me too.
Oh, I remember when I was a
Yeah.
kid, boy, like you go in a restaurant and people would be smoking. You go in a
Yeah.
plane, people would be smoking. Oh my
You'd
goodness.
request a non-smoking seat, and you'd end up in the first row in non-smoking, right
Yeah.
behind the smoking row.
I'd be, as a kid, I'd be this close to somebody smoking,
Yeah.
and they were
Yeah.
in the smoking section, and I'd be in the non-smoking section.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
ridiculous.
So that's one good thing that's come through from society.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean,
So I was wondering too. I was trying to get to. I mean, it's hard with this interview because we keep having to stop it because of noise and then also the wind. But you lived in these places that were becoming kind of gentrified. over time and changing in demographics and that sort of thing. And you were an engineer, so maybe you were a little bit distant from that. But did you see those sort of patterns happening in these places that you were living?
Yeah, I could definitely see it in the Seattle area.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I actually lived right by Pike Place Market.
Did you?
Yeah, I lived in Belltown, which basically doesn't exist anymore. They kind of raised the whole thing and put up condos.
Now, we were up in the University District.
Okay, yeah.
North of Lake Washington.
Yes, right.
And then later on down in Kent.
Kent,
in the
right.
industrial area.
Sure.
And I saw...
Down by Boeing and all that.
Yeah, yeah, very close to Boeing. And in Phoenix, I saw a little bit of it, but not as much as in the Seattle area.
Seattle was drastic. Really drastic.
Yeah, it was. Around here, I've seen a little bit of it in New England.
Yeah, not really,
but
though.
not as much as other places. And
yeah. It's just so old. There's like layers and layers and layers
that's right.
of it.
It's old. And another place that we've lived is Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And
that's also experienced a lot of growth.
Believe it or not, that's experienced a lot of growth there.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's really changed the culture. In fact, in 2002 was the keystone moment for changing the culture there, because that's when they had the Winter Olympics.
Right.
And when they had the Olympics, they had to change all their ways. You could actually buy wine or beer in a restaurant and so on and so forth.
And they built all kinds of stuff too, like new infrastructure. It really grew up as a city.
Well, there's just a lot of people who've left from California that have moved there.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And also, it just seems like the industry has gotten more there. A lot more, probably tech has moved in.
Oh, yeah, a lot of tech. I mean, to this day, my secondary Medicare insurance, it gets mailed to Salt Lake City.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a hub for the West.
Yeah,
it is. It's a distribution hub as well as
it always was a hub. It's always been a hub because there's nothing else within 500 miles.
Yeah, I know that's right.
And it's where the Transcontinental Railroad drove the Golden Spike, so everything came out of there.
Right. Yeah, so. I know that. I've done a lot of driving in the West, and Salt Lake City is kind of this spot, and it takes forever, hours and hours to get to it from some small place in Nevada or something like that.
Yep, that's right.
Yep. All right, so we had another gale force wind, so we're coming back. So we were talking about I was wondering if you'd done any activism, whether that's sort of public activism or sort of interpersonal activism, like mentorship and that sort of thing.
Yes, I've done mentoring all along. Even back in the 80s, I did some mentoring for friends at work who were confused and didn't know what to do or how to do it.
You mentioned there were a couple people.
And a little bit in the 90s. But here in New England, I make it to the group meetings when I can.
Yeah.
I do mentoring for some of the younger guys, or I shouldn't say younger, but less down the path, so to speak. Right, because some people transition later in life. Right, exactly. Yeah. But I haven't done much of the marching in parades or anything like that.
Yeah.
Not that I wouldn't. It's just that, it's 50 miles from here to the parade.
Sure.
But I'm supportive when I can be.
Yeah. Usually those things happen in more populous places.
Yeah.
This is a pretty small town that you're living in. That's great that you're able to mentor other people, because obviously you have quite a depth of experience, for being somebody who transitioned so long ago.
Well, people are like, what can I expect?
Yeah.
What did you experience that I may or may not experience, because times have changed? It's hard to describe. Each individual question is different, and usually when someone asks me something, I have to lean back a little and think about it for a minute.
Yeah. I always think it's interesting because I see those questions online too, like, what can I expect? Well, it's all very individual. It depends on your own life.
What can I expect? What's my mother going to say? How can I tell you what your mother's going to say?
Yeah.
When I tell you that my mother was very accepting. it doesn't mean that yours is going to be.
Yeah, and your career is probably different than another person's.
And you know, your
other relationships.
Your career is gonna. What happens in your career is not just dependent on the people, but what kind of work you're doing.
Yeah, that's why it's so important for corporations, businesses, whatever, to make it public that they are accepting of LGBT people, to put it in their own companies' non-discrimination policies, regardless of what the state is doing, regardless of what the federal government is doing. Put it in your own policies, you know.
Well, our company did.
Yeah, and that was a long time ago. Yeah,
a long time ago, clear back in the 80s. They did that.
Yeah, and they got they kept a really good employee because of that.
Well, you know, you can always pull up stakes, move out, and go somewhere where absolutely nobody knows you and start completely over.
Sure.
But you still have family and friends to deal with.
Sure.
Hopefully they're accepting.
Yeah.
That's all you can say.
Yeah. A lot of people don't have that, though, and they have to build something else, you know, like friendships, friendships that are like family. I think that's why a lot of people seek out the trans groups, right? Because they want community.
That's true.
Yeah, they want more of a family feeling of people who just understand them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've experienced that.
All right, here we go. Take 20. Yeah, I'm laughing. Inside, I'm fuming, unfortunately. Yeah. I keep mentioning to people that we're doing a recording, and they keep talking rather loudly.
And, you know, one by one, after the obvious things are completed, you still need to plan on learning all these other little things, how to behave, how to act.
Yeah. Well, what are those things that
makeup.
you're talking about specifically? Like if you're mentoring a trans woman who's early on, what do you tell her?
Work on the beard.
Okay.
You know, do what you need to do. Don't put electrolysis off to the last minute. You know, little things like that. You know, learn how to do makeup. Take classes in how to do makeup.
Okay.
There are courses. In fact,
Where can you take a course like that?
well, like for instance, if you keep your eyes open,
So, motorcycle.
sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of motorcycles here in New Hampshire. Most motorcycles I've ever seen outside of like Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Well, that's because Cheyenne, Wyoming is on the way to Sturgis, South
Okay.
Dakota.
All right.
And New Hampshire has Laconia Motorcycle Week.
Okay. Yeah, I saw a ton of motorcycles up there. I was just up there
Yeah.
yesterday. Yep.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It's a big festival, motorcycle festival.
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, the group here has arranged to do a couple of unique things. Like, for instance, once upon a time, they contacted a beauty salon and had the people after hours give them
nice.
lessons in how to do makeup and things like that.
That is sweet.
They did another one where they went to a wig shop and had the lady in the wig shop give people the do's and don'ts of wigs
Right.
for those who need them.
That's so
right?
sweet.
And you know, those kinds of things. That's one of the things that the group activities are really good for, because you know there's power in numbers.
Yeah, and that's
You know?
great that you're bringing them to the trans community, because sometimes the case is that trans people have to go to those places. Like I once met a trans woman who used to travel to Las Vegas in order to see somebody who was sort of an expert in dressing male to female transsexuals who were going through that process early on.
I've been to there was a lady in New Jersey who did exactly that. And,
Yeah, it was her whole business.
It was her whole business.
Yeah.
And I went there for several years.
Yeah.
Mostly not so much for lessons like she was giving to some of the others,
Sure.
but because she had these gatherings,
Okay.
these parties like Christmas parties and
Sure.
things like that. So
Yeah.
you'd get together with those, then they'd have big barbecues and stuff in
Yeah.
the backyard, and you get to know them all. And
Like you were saying that you made some trade-offs early on, right?
Yeah.
So that you can have children and that sort of thing.
Right.
Sometimes people have other reasons why they can't transition earlier in life.
yeah.
We all have our process.
The most common one that I've heard is what it costs, the money.
Right. That was a very big issue for me as well, because when I don't have any family and I have no money, and I still don't, so I had to worry about paying for everything. And then when I did actually pay for everything, I had to put a lot of it on credit, and then I was in dire poverty for 10 years after that.
Yeah.
So
Well-
it's a big issue. It is really a big issue.
One of the things I did was I knew that I was going to have to pay for it myself,
Yeah.
so I saved,
Yeah. Yeah.
and saved.
I know I met one guy early on, and this was in Portland, and he recognized me as being a trans person. Like, I think I had had maybe a couple shots or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at the same event. And we met each other in the bathroom, and he was like, I think I'm a guy like you. And I was like, okay. That kind of took me aback, And then he went on to talk to me for a bit, and he said, yeah, to do what I did, it took me working 3 jobs for many years, and I saved everything. I just stuffed all my money in my dresser and then forgot about it, and just that's what I did for many, many years.
That's
And then-
that's what I did.
Yeah. I mean, it takes some sacrifices. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you know that you have to do it,
Yeah.
that's what you have to do.
Yeah. And, from our stories here, I mean, it makes so much sense for, insurance companies to step up and actually, cover it, because it's very needed.
Mm-hmm.
It's needed medical care. It's not just, elective or whatever.
People sometimes ask me about that.
Yeah.
Don't you wish you could have had insurance cover it?
Mhm.
And it's like, well, that would have been nice. However,
It wasn't possible.
I'm not regretting. I didn't want to wait 40 years
No.
to just for that.
No.
That there's no way I could have survived.
I couldn't either, because I mean, I was already on testosterone, and I had already had beard growth as a female person before I even started testosterone. So when I started taking testosterone, my beard really came in very well. So it was kind of an emergency. Having a
Yeah.
beard and large breasts and being a smaller of stature person, it was really apparent. So I just had to do it. I pulled out all the stops, and I just did it.
Yeah.
It did put me in poverty for a long time, though, and that's the problem, right? We don't want people to be in poverty. you
Well,
know?
it's only recently that the insurance companies have realized that.
Yeah,
Of course, their goal in life is not to pay out anything more than they
Yeah.
absolutely have to.
yeah,
So
yeah.
only social pressure has brought it about.
That's right, and a lot of activism.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right now there are states that are pulling back that at the state level. So Medicaid, that is in Florida, they're citing erroneous studies. They're cherry picking studies about trans health, and they are not listening to the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, WPATH. They're not listening to them. They're making their own political judgment about medical care.
Of course they are.
Yeah, and they're denying. They're trying to deny healthcare for trans people, basically.
Well, you can pretty much predict that when you have politicians
Yeah.
that are like they are in Florida right now,
Yep.
or Texas,
Right.
or a few other deep red
Yes.
states.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, because I mean, there's so many trans people who live in both places.
Yeah.
So they're discriminating. They're discriminating against their own people.
But see, I guess if that situation had existed when I needed to transition.
Yeah.
I would have thought nothing of just going to another state to do it.
Well, people are doing that right now.
Yeah.
They're uprooting their lives. They're
You don't-
moving across the country.
You don't have to do that, though. You can just get on an airplane, go visit the doctor, do the procedure, come back home again.
Well, it's more to that, though, because if that sort of discrimination is codified like that by the state, that trickles down to private health care as well. Other doctors, other private insurance, that sort of thing, start to not cover it. And especially in places like Texas, where they're actually not only not covering things or just banning stuff, they're making things illegal.
Yeah.
Right? And they're going
Yeah.
after parents, and they're going after teachers and therapists and doctors.
In that case, I would just move to another state.
Yeah, that's happening.
It's,
That's currently happening.
I've done it many times. It's not that dramatic.
Well, it's not for you probably because you're an engineer and you have a fairly stable relationship and you have a lot of money comparatively. When you think about other trans women who, you know, I mean, I don't mean to get on you, but it's true. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of
Yeah, there is.
underemployment. There's a lot of discrimination against trans people that you might not have experienced.
Well, that may be
Yeah.
somewhat true.
Yeah.
But I am retired and on a fixed income, so
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of money either.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Especially with inflation right now, I'm sure it's hitting you hard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Harder than other people.
We call it Bidenflation.
Sure. Well, I just call it government inflation because it's always the government that's making these bad,
Yeah.
moves.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you so much for meeting with me. Have you ever been interviewed before like this?
No,
Okay. Well, great. Great.
only group discussions at the trans group and things like that.
Sure.
Some down in New Jersey and wherever.
Sure. Sure.
A lot of stuff goes by in a period of over 40 years,
Yeah.
or 36 years, I should say.
Yeah.
So several years can go by and be another opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate having you here because, it's really nice to talk to somebody who, has such a deep history and has seen a lot and experienced a lot. And, your transition is so different than most people's.
I described some of it to the group here in New England, and they were all scratching their heads going, really?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's good that we're ending because my computer just gave me the little ding
Okay.
that it's about to run out of charge. So it probably only has like 5% or something. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.